Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of the day it is. I'm glad to welcome you to this class, to the first class we'll be having on this channel. And I say welcome. And I also want to seize this opportunity to tell you Happy New Year and welcome to year 2026. So we'll be going straight to the class and so as not to veer off, from my train of thought and to stay on track, I have to use notes to take note of something to remain on track. What we'll be talking about in this video, what we'll be talking about in this video, we'll be talking about the definition of literature. We'll be talking about what literature is and what literature is not. Then we are going to talk about the three genres of literature that we have. So let's start with what literature is before we move to what literature is not. So before now, there is actually a Latin word before we had the word literature, the way we have it today. There's actually a Latin word called literatura. And literatura used to mean, if we check ChatGPT, it says the word literature comes from the Latin word literatura, which means writing or knowledge of letters. So that is what the word literature means at its early form when it was still literatura. But over time, the meaning of the word began to evolve as we began to use it. So it began to evolve into writings that makes up the body of information. And along the line, the question began to be asked that what exactly is literature? So we can say we have two meaning of literature. When we say what is literature? Two meanings actually come to mind. Do we refer to anything that is written, anything that have letters like anything like this, or even a prescription, a job prescription? Do we refer to that too as literature? In some sense, yes, we can refer to it as literature. However, in another sense, we cannot refer to this as literature. So when we say literature, sometimes we refer to any written word, any written text at all, referred to as literature. But in another sense, when we talk about literature, what comes to our mind is a specific masterpiece of art or a body of work that is specific, that is done intentionally and created for the purpose of art. That's what we refer today as literature. So you can, for you to identify it, you can define, you can recognize the literature that serves as a masterpiece of art with a capital letter L literature. That's the literature that has to do with artistic work, novels, dramas, pictures, drawings, and so on and so forth. Everything that falls under art. While the other literature that has to do with the small letter L, you can refer to that one as every other thing that is written, doctor prescription, ingredients that are written at the back of products, all those are examples of literature. Now, so under that, we already have what literature is and what literature is not. Now, let's move to literature mainly. Now, when we talk about literature, let's talk about literature. Literature is divided into three genres, and those genres are what encompasses every kind of literature that we have. So any literature you see today must fall under one of these genres. And like I want to believe that you are not new to it, and those are poetry, play, and prose. So I'm going to talk about these three genres of literature in order of appearance, how they came into in the order of existence. So starting with poetry. So one of the first things I would like you to understand is that poetry is one of the first form of literature. In fact, it is being described as old as man. So it is a body of artistic work that is written in lines and stanzas. That's one thing you must understand. Poetry is a body of artistic work written in what? In line and stanza. And we have different types of poetry. We have different types of poetry. There's ode, there's sonnet, there's lyrics, there's ballads, there's epic, mock epic, and so on. They are just the number. We are just have them plenty like that. Now, literature, when in literature, why it is one of the oldest is because singing is one of the oldest arts that man is known with. Men, the early cavemen they have their music, they have their dance, they have that comes up in their rituals and so on and so forth. So all those songs, all those incantations and all those things, they fall under poetry. So poetry has music elements. In fact, music can be seen as a form of poetry, and that falls under the lyrics as type of poetry. Now, when you want to classify your poetry, you can classify them based on different things. Sometimes we classify poetry based on region, that is the author who wrote them, or sometimes in some situations we can classify them based on where they were written. But majority of the time, it's always when it comes to classifying poetry based on regions, it's always based on the author or what the poem is talking about. Do you understand me? Now, um, so based on that, we have African poetry, we have non-African poetry, we have Caribbean poetry, we have Indian poetry, and so on. We have just a number of them like that. So the next one moving on to is play. So after the prose, we had after the poetry, after poetry, the next form of literature that man experience is the play. Now, in some other video, I'm going to explain all these transitions, the transition between your poetry to the transition between the poetry and play, then the transition between the play and the prose. Another separate video is going to handle how those transition came about, how those transitions took place, what happened, what occurred, what was going on in the world at that time. And another thing, before I forget, I would like you to understand is that the literature that we're going to be talking about for now, because of WAEC, the exams, JAM, and the Nigerian curriculum for now, is going to be solely based, don't let me say solely based, but it's going to be majorly based on the English literature. So most of the timeline we are going to be drawing and we are going to be talking about and the books, they will be tilting towards English literature. So however, we are going to touch some other kinds of literature on this in this class and in this channel as a whole. So like I was saying, after the poetry, the next form of literature we had was the play. So and what do we refer? What kind of literature is the play? You already have an idea what it is. A play is a body of literature that is being written or divided into acts and scenes. I get to me. So what makes a play is that what makes a play peculiar and different from the poetry is that play is meant to be performed, is meant to be dramatized. Hence, you have hence you can call a play a drama too. You can call it a play text or a dramatic text or a drama text. So a play is meant to be dramatized on a stage in a theater. That is what a play is. You are meant to act it out. So there will be a director, there will be lightnings, there will be curtains and all those things. That's one of the things that make a play is meant to be acted in theater. And in those days, at the birth of at the birth of play as a genre of literature during the medieval period, yeah, the play was an offshoot from the medieval period. People began to get tired of poetry. Like I said, that would be a class. That would be a class for another video. So the play then, what made the play a play was that it was performed. People performed it. The other actors are going to act it out. So that was how we had it, and that was how we had play then. Now, I would also like you to understand that we have different types of play. So we have different types of drama. So the drama could be tragic, the drama could be comedy, and the drama could be tragic comedy. We have other forms, other minor forms of, we like to say subcategory of drama, like the melodrama and some other types that are not actually did not actually take a main stage, unlike the tragic comedy, the comedy, and the tragic um, genre or tragic types of drama. So when we say tragic, what do we mean by tragic? Tragic drama the drama that usually ends with a sad note. It ends when the tragic drama happens, ends on a bad note, something bad, something catastrophic happens. Probably the the protagonist in the drama goes through a catastrophic situation. Either he loses his child, loses his property, he lost something, or he even loses his life. Where the hero or the protagonist in the story that is contained in the drama actually dies. That's an example. It just has to do with anything that has to do with calamity. Although in the classic literature, they believed in the classic era, they believed drama was good for the development of the human soul because they believe that it helps people to reflect on their character and it brings them to that point of catharsis. So they refer to catharsis as a purgation of emotion. So we have the comedy. The comedy usually is an amusing drama, an amusing play that you watch or that you read where it evokes laughter. There's an eruption of laughter while dramatic while a comedy play is going on and usually ends on an amusing note or on a happy note. Uh, that's a comedy. While tragicomedy is usually the mixture of both, but usually majority of the time at the ending of your tragicomedy, most of the time your tragicomedy is going to end on a happy or amusing note or at least a relieving note. However, there is going to be very catastrophic occurrence, unpleasant situations that is going to take place in between the play. Nevertheless, as the play unfolds, towards the ending of the play, there's going to be an amusing part or a pleasant ending towards the middle of the play. Then the next after your play is your prose. The next genre after the play is the prose. And what is the prose? The prose is the largest, the most elaborate, and the last form or genre of literature to be developed. So because of its elaborateness, it has the ability to capture more things than that the poetry will not be able to capture physically, that is in writing. Same thing too with the play too in writing. Because for play, in fact, before this modern era, one of the rules of a good play was that a play must end under 24 hours. That was before. That is all these movies that we are watching must be short, everything must happen, or the incident in the play, everything must be within 24 hours. I don't know if you understand me. So let me say, okay. If a play starts now, the way it is, that's according to Aristotle's poetics. Once the play starts now, or starts at particular, maybe let's say 1 a.m., the play opens 1 a.m. Still in that play must be concluded before the next full cycle of 24 hours in that play. Not necessarily the time it takes to shoot up to create the play itself, but inside the play, the timing in the play must not exceed 24 hours. So we are talking about the prose. So what is prose? Prose is an elaborate body of literature that is written or that is being divided into paragraphs and chapters. They are divided into what? Paragraphs and chapters. Now, because your prose is an elaborate work of literature, contains more characters, contains more larger and more expounded and more developed themes, contains a wider geographical settings compared to what we have in your poetry and your play. So we also have types of prose, different type of prose. However, all the numerous types of prose we have, they can be largely categorized into two groups, and that is either irrespective of the kind of prose a prose is or falls under, it has to belong to either of these two groups, and that's what the fictional prose or the non-fiction prose. And what do we mean by non-fiction? Well, let's start with fiction. What do we mean by fiction? Fiction is a kind of prose that the story in it or what the prose is talking about is something that is being imagined. It is as a result of the imaginative work of the author or the creator of the story in that prose. Another name you can call Prose. And one thing I want to talk about, the another name we can call prose is novel. And the reason why it was called, why it is adopted, or it was tagged the name novel, is because it is considered as a new form of literature. Remember, I said I'm going to talk about this thing in the order of their appearance. So the prose is the latest genre of literature so far. The prose that we have today is the latest genre of literature. Hence, it is usually called a novel. And if we check the meaning of novel in the dictionary, what we are going to find is a novel is what? It means something new, something that has not been seen before. So the genre of literature that came last is the prose. Hence, its name is referred to as. Hence, another name it has is called the novel. So the novel can be categorized into two large groups, and that is either the fictional group or the non-fiction group. So when we talk about fictional group, it talks about stories that you imagine in your head, that the storyteller or the author creates in his head with his imagination. It is not real. The people there are not real. The incident is not real. Even that does not mean that the author cannot create a story in his head, in his imagination, based on a real life event. Even if he created a story based on a real life event, as long as the details in that prose or in that novel is not something that happened actually, that did not actually take place, then it is a fictional prose or a fictional novel. Why non-fiction is just the opposite of what we just explained. Anything that is real, anything that actually happened and took place is referred to as what? As your non-fiction. So examples of your fiction are stories like The Joys of Motherhood, like Uche Micheta. Then we have this popular African book by the great author Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. So most of the books that Chinua Achebe wrote, a number of them are all fictional novels. Some of the books that was written by somebody like Adichie, Ngozi Chimamanda Adichie, are also fictional stories. Even though the elements that make up that story was inspired, was influenced, was impacted by real life situations, real life incidents, they are still fictional. They are not non-fiction, they are still fictional. While on the other hand, the examples of non-fiction are the newspaper. The newspaper, an example of non-fiction rules. Just for example, you have books like The Man Died, written by Professor Wole Soyinka. That's an example of a book that is non-fiction, because that book, The Man Died, is a book that Professor Wole Soyinka wrote while he was in prison. It was a prison account, a letter that was writing to somebody. Was thrown in prison under the regime of General Gowon during the incident, or during the incident of the Nigerian Biafran War. So let me just give brief examples of poems. We all know what poem is, but for the sake of the class, examples of poems. Most of we have we have yes, there are lots. There are a lot of poems that we can draw example for. Same thing too with play. Then before I forget, the person who writes a poem is referred to as a poet. The person who writes a poem is referred to as the poet, while the person who writes the play is referred to as a playwright. The person who writes a play is referred to as a playwright. Examples of playwrights is Wole Soyinka. A lot of his work, he wrote a lot of plays. Another example is William Shakespeare. I don't think Shakespeare ever wrote anything aside from play and poetry. So refer to William Shakespeare too as a playwright. Example of other playwrights, we have Christopher Mallory, and we have a number of them like that. Then for prose, the person who writes a prose is referred to as author. The person who writes a prose is referred to as what? As author. So that will be all for now in this video. The next video we'll be talking about elements of literature, where we talk about specific things that makes literature literature. What makes literature literature? The things that belong to literature, characteristics and traits that belong to literature. That's what is going to be discussed in the next class. That will be tied to the elements of literature. So just for a quick recap, what is the difference between the poetry and the play? The poetry is written in what is a body of work written in what in lines and stanzas, divided into lines and stanzas or verse. You can also refer to the stanzas as well as verse. Although some books or some poetry are very long, they are divided into something called, instead of stanzas or verses, they write books or cantos. That's when you start reading long, elaborate poetry like epic poems. Those poems are epic, like the name goes, an epic poem. They span over 10,000 lines, some almost 20,000 lines. Some poetry are as thick as a small dictionary, and everything is just poetry. Those are the old poetry there, long English poetry, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, that's an example. Beowulf, we have Alexander Pope's Rape of the Lock, the Dunciad, we have a number of them. We have African poems that are as long as that. Epic of Mali, that's Sundiata. We have another one written in South Africa about Shakta Zulu and so on. We have many of them like that. So now, why the poetry is written into stanzas and verses? Please, the standard is written into line is divided into lines and verses or stanzas. While your play is a body of work that is written and divided into acts and scenes meant to be performed on a stage in a theater. That's the full description of your play. Then for your prose is written in paragraphs and chapters. Do not mistake, it's written in what? In paragraphs and chapters, and it is usually an elaborate form of literature. So thank you for staying up to this moment. I'll see you in the next class.